Alright guys, another day, another nerf for dungeon farms. We're not gonna waste any time on pointless introductions. Let's jump into the best dungeons right now. The first and probably best is going to be Blind Burrows. You find it right here in Howitzer, and this continues to be pretty much as it was up until this point. You still have large groups of spiders that explode and spawn other spiders that you can defeat. And generally speaking, I'm still seeing like 500,000 XP at around level 80-81, which is in tune with how it was before. If you want to fully maximize this, I recommend going for the 3 boss spawns in the first phase of the dungeon. There are 3 spawn locations for this, and the layout is always going to be the same, so you don't need to worry about any variation. Simply make your way over there, which is usually going to attract all of these larger groups, and they will continue to follow you. So once you get a big stack of these, you can just take them down really quickly. Hopefully that's going to happen in the boss room, but if it doesn't, it's not a problem to just defeat them on the corridor heading over to that boss. And once you do reach the boss area, this is going to also spawn a number of other enemies that you can also defeat, and it's going to give you some pretty nice XP. You will rinse and repeat this another 2 times, so after the first one, you can do it 2 more times. There are 2 more separate rooms that you also have to search for, and this is going to also provide you a ton of enemies to defeat. Now on the way, you might also find some of these pillars. You can totally use them. It makes the farm a lot more efficient if you're lucky, and maybe get something that deals more AoE or just buffs your damage. Once the first section of the map is done and the 3 mini bosses are defeated, then I recommend to just go ahead, exit the dungeon at the entrance and reset it. There's no point in continuing from this point on, because at the middle section you're not gonna get any XP, even though you are kind of fighting a big room filled with enemies. Plus, it's not worth it to go for the boss. It's just a waste of time, and the XP that you get is barely minimal. Now, the second one that I've covered before, which still actually runs rather decently, is the Ghoul Run Canals, though this has seen, from my experience, a bit of a nerf. However, the second portion of this dungeon is going to give you quite a bit of XP compared to the first portion. So in the first one, you do have to defeat all these red marked enemies on the map, which is pretty annoying, but once you do get like most of them down, the remaining ones will just spawn to you and you can quickly take them down. It's not like they will give you much XP, but there are some pillars in here that can further help you to just deal with them a lot faster. Once you do reach the second section of this map, this is where it becomes a lot more interesting, because now you have to fight some of these, I believe, corpse pillars, and as you attack them, this is going to spawn larger groups of elites and also some of the spiderling enemies. You do have to be a bit careful about these enemies, because there's going to be a lot of poison on the ground, and especially if you have a very unfavorable nightmare dungeon that also spawns explosives, you're gonna get one-shotted in no time. So be careful about that, and my recommendation is to just pop off all CDs when you get close to it and try to like just group up everybody into a nice big pile and then delete them with some of your best attacks. Outside of that, there are going to be, as I've said, 2 corpse piles, and in the normal version of this dungeon, you're going to want to go ahead and aim for both of them, because this is going to ensure max XP. However, if you defeat the second corpse pile, this is going to finish the dungeon, but I don't recommend to leave just yet, because you might still have a bunch of large groups of enemies in some of the corners you didn't discover around the second portion of this dungeon. So search for them, defeat them, and then you can go ahead, exit, rinse and repeat, and just do this whole process over and over. Now, I did test some of the other dungeons, and I will say this, I was kinda not really pleased with the XP that I got. So I've seen a number of people recommending Ironhold. Unfortunately, this was quite mediocre for me, and I didn't get as much XP as I thought I would. Now, some of the other content creators, I believe, had a number of very large spawns of enemies here, but for me, I did this a number of times, and I believe I only got 1 to spawn, and even that was not completely consistent. So if you can reliably get 2 of these big groups of enemies and like demon elites to spawn, then yes, you can get a pretty decent kind of like XP boost right there that you normally can't. But otherwise, this is in the second section of the dungeon, and until then you do have to navigate the first one, get a key, and then reach that second dungeon area. I've also tested Demon Wake. This might look good in theory, but in practice it was also not that great. Now, mainly once you do reach the second section over here, which is actually quite close to the first one, you just have to grab a really quick one of these piles, destroy them, and then go into the second section. But in the second one, you also have large packs of enemies that are marked on the map, and you do have to defeat all of them. However, as you defeat them, more of them will spawn, but only in 2 instances with some of the bigger shielded groups as it happens. So no, it's also not going to be worth it. I would say avoid it unless you really cannot do anything else, or unless you find a nightmare version of this and can complete it with a friend in a timely manner. This brings us to the final and probably the best farm right now, which you should go ahead and do, and that is to just spam the Nightmare Dungeon sigils, but not waste them. So there's a trick to do this without having to complete the Nightmare Dungeon and still keep it on repeat in case you get one that is really great. So let me give you an example right here with the Ghoul Run Canals, which is still a pretty good Nightmare Dungeon, and I got a sigil for it, level 40 or something, and that meant I would also get the bonus XP from defeating higher level enemies. So the gist of it is that you're going to want to go inside of it, just take down all groups of enemies up until the very last objective and stop completing that last objective, which finishes the dungeon and also gives you the glyph upgrade. Stop before that so that you can reset this dungeon with the same glyph, keep it, and then do it on repeats ad infinite. So this is how it's going to work like. The first section is again going to be filled with these enemies, complete that section and advance into the second one. Into the second portion of it, there's gonna be a couple of these corpse piles that we have to destroy, which again are a great source of enemies. Plus, there are a couple of events that you get on the way, which also spawn a number of very good groups. Now, once you do reach the last corpse pile, and assuming that you already covered everything and defeated all the other groups of enemies, leave this intact. If you defeat this, this is going to completely end the dungeon and you can no longer reset it. In this case, I will leave this one and just go at the entrance by exiting from the quick menu. From this point on, just go ahead and complete just like a bit of any other dungeon or cellar out there that you might find. You don't have to even reach the half of it, just staying there for like a couple of minutes and doing some of the objectives right there will respawn the Nightmare Dungeon that you haven't yet completed. In my case, I just picked a random one nearby. You can pick a totally different one that might be much faster, like Still Ruins of a Redo or whatever you want. And once you are like halfway through or less than half, just exit, go back to your Nightmare Dungeon, and lo and behold, it should be completely reset. And yes, this also includes to the number of revives that you might have consumed, like maybe you died a couple of times, those are also going to be back to 4 or however many you have from the sigil. Now, the downside here is that you're not going to be able to completely upgrade the glyph every single time because that finishes the dungeon, so you will be lacking a bit on that part. However, you will be gaining everything in terms of XP, plus you don't have to search for sigils or craft them or waste sigil dust to get your perfect dungeon in this case. You will of course want to aim this with the blind burrows, which is what will give you the maximum amount of XP, but I just wanted to demonstrate this with the current one. It literally works with any dungeon. This is it, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.